Okay, so we're going to dive in to the learning zone model. This is a really simple template that I like to teach and use because it gives us a visual for what is happening in our brain and in our bodies when we're stressed and also when we're not, and what that looks like and how we know the difference, how we move between those states. So we're going to be going through each layer of this in depth, but the three zones of the learning zone model are the panic zone, the learning zone, and the comfort zone. And you can see those here. So we're going to start with the red zone, the panic or danger zone. So this is the outer ring. This is the red outer ring. This is where whatever it is we're doing, it's way too difficult. We're overwhelmed and we're unable to learn. You might feel frustration, fear, sadness, anger, overwhelm, anxiety, prolonged or intense stress. Any of those things can put us into our panic zone. And this is where dysregulation occurs. And I'm going to define that in a minute, but this is where it happens, is out in the panic zone. So for a moment right now, I want you, if you would, close your eyes and think of something that scares you. We're just going to do this for a brief moment, but I want you to notice what happens in your body. What are the feelings, the sensations that happen throughout your body when you imagine that thing that scares you? You can feel it. You can feel the way it takes over your body. You might even feel it in your head or in your brain. You can physically feel those sensations, okay? That's what we're talking about. So you can come back, you can open your eyes, you can take a little breath, you can shake it off. I don't want you to stay in that panic zone place, but I just want us to connect with what that means when we're in our panic zone and what that feels like. We'll talk about that a little bit more. This is dysregulation. So I'm going to go through what this means. And Dr. Daniel Siegel, who is in your resources, he teaches this to children, and he calls it flipping your lid, which is, I think, a really accurate euphemism for what this feels like. So, and he has this hand model of the brain that we're going to use, where he talks about this palm wrist area. This signifies the reptilian part of the brain, our connection with the amygdala. This is fight, flight, or freeze. This is where this happens. This is the oldest part of the brain. This is the part of the brain that is designed to keep us safe. This is all about survival, okay? So this is a really important, very hardwired, ancient part of our brains. If you put your thumb in here in the middle, this represents the limbic system. This is where emotions and memories are stored, and it's closely connected to this reptilian part of the brain and the brainstem. And then if you fold your fingers over the top like this, this represents the prefrontal cortex. This whole top part of the brain is the cortex. This is the higher level thinking that we can do as humans. And this is physically right here in the front of our brains. This is where language and communication happens, cognitive flexibility, reasoning, problem solving, creativity, empathy, being able to see something from another person's perspective happens in the prefrontal cortex, okay? So we have these three parts of our brain. This is called triune brain theory. And when you are making this, if you're doing this with me, you can feel the connections between the fingers and the thumb and the back part of the hand. This is an integrated brain. This is a regulated brain. This is what we have when we're calm. We've got access to all these parts of our brain. When you feel, so just like this picture shows, when you feel frustrated, scared, attacked, when you are in your red zone, in your panic zone, what happens is the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of the brain, tries to keep thinking, tries to stay rational. If you are a parent, this is my best experience, my most accurate example of this phenomenon. as a parent, when I'm trying to stay calm and my child is pressing all of my buttons, I feel my prefrontal cortex, and Daniel Siegel describes it as hanging on, hanging on a ledge. So my prefrontal cortex is like, I'm trying to stay grounded. I'm trying to stay calm. I'm trying to stay logical, but I just can't do it. And at some point, that prefrontal cortex lets go, has to let go. It has to. We flip our lid, okay? We lose access to our prefrontal cortex because our reptilian brain has to take over. Something has overwhelmed our system to put us into our survival response, our fight, flight, or freeze response, so that we can act quickly. This system is designed to keep us safe. It's designed to help us respond and react without thinking to to a danger, to something that is potentially harmful, so that we can react quickly. But what happens in this state is that, and most of the time in our modern life, we're not in a physically in a life or death situation, in a physically dangerous situation. Sometimes we are, but most of the time when this is happening to us now, it's an emotional threat. It's a mental threat that we're facing, and our brain goes offline. So we lose access. This is the part where I want to bring in some self-compassion. We don't have access to our higher level thinking when we're in this state, okay? You cannot expect yourself to think your way through, to stay rational, to stay reasonable, to use all those amazing tools and skills that you have. You can't expect yourself to use them when you don't have access to your brain, okay? So just we're going to have some self-compassion right there. Okay. So what happens here in this red zone, like I said, it's hard for our prefrontal cortex to stay integrated. It disintegrates, dysregulates. This is dysregulation. And we go into the reptilian brain and we're in fight, flight, or freeze. What's important to know about this state is that there's no learning that can happen here. No learning can happen when we don't have access to the learning part of our brain. We're prioritizing safety. Okay, this is just neurobiologically, this is what's happening. So because we don't have access to our prefrontal cortex, we have limited access to communication, to flexibility, to problem solving, perspective taking. That's all out the window. And these emotions that have come along with this fight, flight, or freeze, our body has dumped chemicals. This is what emotions are. The brain sends a signal to have a rush of chemicals through the body to prompt us into action. And what happens with these chemicals, these emotions, is that if we don't process them, they accumulate in our bodies, and over time they start causing us other problems. And this is the state, this red zone, panic zone, this is the state where we have the potential for trauma, where we have the potential to carry around this trauma that we've experienced inside of our bodies. Okay. So when you are in this state of dysregulation, or like I was talking about my child, when my child is in this state of dysregulation, this is contagious. So when one person in an interaction is dysregulated, it's way more likely that the other person is going to become dysregulated. And if you think through any of your relationships, especially your close relationships, I'm sure you can think of an example where, oh yeah, this is true. One person is upset, it's very easy for the other person to get upset. And during this period of time right now, specifically when we're recording this in 2020, during this time, much of our work as interpreters is with people who are dysregulated, with people who are overwhelmed, who are stressed, who are scared, who are maybe sick, who are hurting in some way. So when we are the interpreter in a situation with one or two or more people who are dysregulated, it's that much easier for us as the interpreter to also become dysregulated. And you can imagine what the effects on our work are there. You probably don't have to imagine. I know I've experienced it. If you're an interpreter, I'm sure you've experienced being in an interaction where you are the interpreter and getting dysregulated yourself, having an emotional response based on something that's going on. It's really hard to do our work in that space. So what we want to do is we want to get to know our own red zone responses. This is the first step to working with them. So I'm going to ask you to consider these questions. Go ahead and grab your handout. This is number 1 and number 2. I'm going to talk through them. You can start to think about and write down your responses. And then we're going to go into breakout rooms and we can talk about these, okay? So the first question is, what do you notice in yourself when you're stressed, overwhelmed, or panicked? What are the thoughts that play through your mind? What are the emotions and sensations in your body? What do you do when you're stressed? You can get to know your responses. They're usually not too varied. They're usually pretty consistent. And some of these, there's some examples that I have here. So some thoughts that could be running through your mind when you're in this place of overwhelm or stress is maybe, a lot of times it's thoughts about what another person should or shouldn't be doing. So they shouldn't behave that way. They're going to get mad. This is unfair. What should I do? Maybe I feel overwhelmed or stressed about that. So these are the thoughts that might play through your mind, and you can get specific about what those thoughts are for you. It probably varies depending on the situation, but a lot of times we have a consistent undercurrent of either blaming other people, or sometimes we really have an undercurrent of blaming ourselves. I really messed that up. They're going to think badly of me. I did it again, those kinds of things. So those might be thoughts. Those are examples. Emotions and sensations. So you're going to feel down into your body. Think about where you feel these things and what you're feeling exactly. So you might notice, oh, my heart rate speeds up. My chest feels tight. I have a pit in my stomach. I feel tension in my shoulders. Whatever those spots are for you. I have a spot in my eyebrow that I feel stress. And I know when I start rubbing my head here, I go, oh, okay, I'm just letting this stress fester. I must be in this red zone spot more often because this tells me. So notice what happens in your body. And then in your behaviors, what do you do? So some of us might have very strong or typical fight, flight, or freeze responses. So we are wired and we are socialized to gravitate towards one of these more than the other. They also do depend on what the situation is that we're in. But you may notice that you have a tendency to want to approach the situation. This would be the fight response. You want to approach it, you want to resolve it, you want to get it taken care of quickly. You may notice that you have the flee response, the flight response. So you may notice that in a difficult situation, you just want to get out of there. You just want to run away. You just want to hide. You just want to, be away from the situation. Or you might notice this freeze response, which really is like a stuck in place, deer in headlights kind of feeling, where you don't feel like you can flee and you don't feel like you can fight and you're not sure what else to do. And this is in an animal, this is where they play dead. So you might be able to categorize your behavior as one of those three things. Okay, and then the second question, we want to also think about, what do you notice in other people around you when they are dysregulated? So you can practice this and you can talk about this with anyone in your life, but it may be consumers in general. It may be your kids or your partner or your best friend or your parents, someone that you spend a lot of time with. Think about, what do I notice in them when they're starting to get dysregulated? What are their behaviors? How does their tone or their affect change? What other things do you notice? So for example, my kids are really great mirrors for my own dysregulation, and they're teenagers now, and so they will tell me that, Mom, are you hungry? Are you tired? Those are my two. Often I'm either hungry or tired or both, and that's a really dangerous combination for me. But they know what my voice sounds like. They know that I get a little shorter with them. They know that I get a little more critical of them when I am needing one of those things myself. So you can do this. You can be on the lookout just to start to notice what it looks like when another person is dysregulated, because what that tells you then is that they don't have access to their brain. It's like, it's almost a way to not take their actions personally, because we can look and go, that's dysregulation. That means they're not firing on all cylinders. That's a normal human thing. That means they have a need that hasn't been filled. And as an interpreter in a situation, it may not be our job to do anything with that information, but just simply to have the information can be really helpful when it looks like the consumer is upset with us, and we can go, oh, there's dysregulation happening. Okay, let me see, what is part of my job that can help make this smoother and can help me to not take it personally, because that can be a really dangerous trap to fall into as an interpreter.